Hello, everyone. Welcome to the resuming of Webinar Wednesday. We were on hiatus for a few weeks while everybody was dealing with GDC and PAX East and all kinds of fun things. We hope you are recovered and ready to get back into the swing of things. Keith Fuller, who normally leads the Leadership and Production track, should be joining us a little later. So I'm Tristan Hightower, Operations Manager for the IGDA, kicking this off. This week, I would like to introduce Mike O'Connor. Mike is based out of Chicago. He's a lead programmer there at Iron Galaxy. He's been lead programmer for about 2 years, and he's been at the studio itself for about 6 years now. Prior to that, he was at Midway for about 5 years. And I'll let Mike do any additional introing he'd like, and I'll hand it over to him.
All right, thanks Tristan for the intro. So, hi, I'm Mike O'Connor. I'm going to be talking today about making a transition from engineer to lead. So a little over 2 years ago, I made the jump. I started out with my first project as lead programmer was Iron Galaxy's Dive Kick, and it was a great learning experience. It was an original title for us. It was a first for the studio and for me, so lots of learning all around there. After that, then I had a kid, so more changes, and coming straight back from paternity leave, I jumped into Borderlands 2 Vita, and after finishing that, I decided I hadn't had enough Borderlands yet, and so I just recently wrapped up the kind of initial submission and day one patch for Borderlands The Handsome Collection, which is out yesterday. So I want to start by talking about what is different about being a lead as compared to being an engineer. So one of the first things is that you are now responsible for other people. So what does that mean? So one of the things you're going to do now is you're going to be responsible for establishing tasks for your team to work on, creating a schedule or schedules, and also establishing a priority of all of those tasks. Yeah, obviously the priorities in particular are important. You want to make sure that people know kind of the order of the things that they should be working on. And setting those can also allow them to operate kind of independently of you having to constantly tell them what they should be working on. So if they know, these 3 things are priority 1, 4 things are priority 2, they can kind of just independently operate and knock those things out, and you can kind of just check in and make sure stuff's getting done. Speaking of that, so another thing that you're now responsible for is tracking the progress of all of these things that people are working on. So you definitely don't want to get into, the micromanager mode and, you're constantly asking, so how's that bug going? It's been 5 minutes and it's not fixed. So finding kind of the right groove there of how you track people's progress. We use Jira internally, and we've used it at a lot of external projects. And that works basically as well as people will use it. So if you are going to use something like that, you really kind of do have to stay on top of your team. I think us programmers are kind of lazy by nature, and we're not necessarily good about like setting a task as in progress and marking hours or whatever. So whatever you decide to do, make sure that everybody commits to it. Another thing that you should be doing is you need to ensure that everybody has what they need for working on your project. So that might be, you're on a UE3 project, or I guess, for people on the hot new UE4 tech, UE4 or whatever, you need, maybe a fancy pants machine that has like, 12 core CPU for compiling and, new graphics card or whatever. So make sure everybody has what they need, tech-wise at least, to be able to operate on your project and run efficiently. The last thing you want is people wasting time waiting on compiles much longer than they need to, and things being slow. So make sure your guys can work efficiently, guys or girls, sorry, can work efficiently and effectively. Then the last part of this is mentoring and development. And so this can kind of take a few different forms. One thing that we do on all of my projects now is we do code reviews. We shoot for every check-in. And this isn't always me doing this. This is usually what we do is someone will have a change that they're ready to have reviewed, and they'll just kind of say, hey, take a look at this change list, and whoever's available will do it. I'm usually the fallback guy if everybody else is busy. So that's one way of just kind of feedback just on how they're doing with their actual kind of programming work. But then there's also, we do one-on-one meetings to make sure that you're giving people feedback on like how are they doing overall. Are they doing a good job of communicating when a task is running longer than they expected it to? Are they making sure that if they're doing an awesome job and getting ahead, that they're letting you know like, hey, I need more work. So that stuff is all super important, and you should really focus on that. Another thing that's different is this job is much less about writing code now. So I mentioned code reviews. That's one thing that I usually take upon myself, at least to do a lot, to make sure the quality is high, but also to kind of teach people, especially if you have more junior engineers, kind of teach them the right way to do something. Oops. Another part of it is also evaluating solutions. So before people run off and start writing code, you want to make sure that they're kind of on the right track. So a good kind of loop there would be they've got a problem, a task, a bug, they investigate, they come back to you and they're like, hey, here's what I'm thinking about doing, and then you kind of discuss that and you just iterate on that loop until everybody is happy with their solution, and then they go and start writing code. That can help save a lot of time, and it's also an opportunity for you to kind of help improve their problem-solving skills. There's also something I would call internal management. So that's more stuff like team meetings or kind of one-on-one meetings that you do with people, like I talked about with kind of the mentorship stuff. You want to be meeting with your people and letting them know how they're doing. The good and the bad, too, is it's important to give people good feedback and not just like, hey, here's what you could do better. Team meetings, it's important to make sure that you're kind of meeting with your team in some way, however you want to do it. I've worked on distributed teams, so that's like kind of a nice little twist there, especially if you're kind of adjusting to this as a first-time lead. We use Skype a lot, and we just kind of have a persistent group chat that everybody can kind of use, and that's kind of the main broadcast for information that needs to go out to everybody quickly. There's also what I would call external management, so that's going to be more stuff that's outside your team boundaries, we'll say. So that might be, for example, you're running the tech team, you might be working with the design team or the animation team or the art team or all of those. So kind of working with those interdisciplinary teams and meetings between those, you're probably going to be pretty involved in kind of all that stuff and make sure you've got a good handle on what other teams need from your team. You also might be involved in publisher meetings if you have a publisher, so phone calls, meetings, progress reports, all sorts of stuff there, and that's kind of all on you now. There's also a bigger focus on soft skills now, so it's not just kind of about who's the best engineer who can kind of do all this awesome low-level stuff. So you want to focus on things like communication, so your ability to convey kind of your intent about something, get your point across. I think this is super important for everybody, regardless of if you're in a leadership position or not, but as a lead, it is absolutely critical. You want to be able to be communicating, what's going on to your team, to your superiors, to publishers, to other teams. You're going to be doing a lot of communicating, so sharpen up those skills. Leadership's another big one. So, I mean, that's kind of obvious, right? Like, lead is what your title is, right? So I would call this the ability to kind of inspire your people and get everybody pulling in the same direction. I'm sure everybody kind of knows a friend or a coworker. Some people just kind of have this skill kind of more naturally than others, and they're just the kind of person who can naturally kind of unite people and kind of get them all on one page. And so if you're not one of those people who it comes naturally to, you should definitely work on it because it will help a lot. Listening is sort of the, I think, kind of the counterpart to communication. So don't just be that person who's sitting there in a meeting waiting for their turn to speak. Really listen to what people have to say. There's a lot of important stuff you can pick up on there if you're paying attention. You don't want to just, if you're doing a status meeting, just kind of sitting there tuning it out. Like, listen to what people are saying. You're going to possibly be able to pick up on maybe something's going wrong, or the way that somebody's speaking. Pay attention. It's going to make your job easier. And speaking of making your job easier, so delegation, super, super, super critical as a lead. You can't do it all, and so you're going to have to learn how to distribute tasks and responsibility. This is something that I think doesn't necessarily come naturally to everybody. I know it didn't for me, especially you're coming from this background where you're used to doing, and now you're managing and you're leading. So you have to learn to let go a little bit, and it can be scary, but it's going to be okay. And lastly is kind of conflict resolution. So this isn't really so much like, oh, Jimmy and Billy are fighting and I need to step in and fix things. This is more, maybe somebody is struggling, or you've got some, hopefully not, but maybe insubordination, whether it was intentional or not, and you kind of need to get in and resolve these issues before they blow up and become something bigger. And unfortunately, along with the job comes some more stress. I wish that wasn't the case, but so far that's been my experience, and maybe I'm doing it wrong, but I kind of think it's inevitable. So you have all these additional duties now, right? You're not just responsible for writing code and fixing your bugs. You're running meetings and you're reporting on progress, you're checking up on people, you're calling a publisher, you're doing all this extra stuff that you didn't have to do before, and you might even still be writing some code. So it's a bigger burden, and so be ready for that. You're also, you're responsible for other people now, not necessarily like directly responsible, like if somebody, you can't control people individually, that's not feasible, but if things start going poorly, like it's up to you to kind of step in and kind of, straighten out the ship a little bit. And also you have responsibility for the project. So I sort of take a, the buck stops here kind of approach to this, and there are no excuses. Like if things are going poorly, it's your job to make them not go poorly anymore. So if things get rough, that can be super stressful, and at least in my experience, even before I was lead, you're usually going to hit a rough patch on a project, so that's probably going to result in a lot more stress for you. So next I want to talk about some tips for new leads. A lot of these are, they're either things that I wish people had told me or things that people have told me as I've been starting out. So the first one is, when you're getting started, emulate somebody who you had or who's a good lead. It can be really difficult to find your way at first. You're doing this brand new job that you've never done before, and like, where do you even start? And so you can kind of have a blueprint of like, well, how did this person do something? Did they do weekly one-on-ones? How did they kind of do tasks and schedules and all of these things? And so that blueprint is something that has worked before. And so that's like a really great head start. And you don't have to follow that forever, but it'll really help you instead of kind of trying to just make this all up on your own. I would caution against deviating too quickly from the plan. You want to make sure that you've given everything a chance to work. Obviously this worked for somebody else, and that doesn't mean it's going to work for you, but give it a chance. You really should understand kind of how all the kind of pieces fit together before you get in there and you try and modify something. Something else that's really helpful is find a mentor. I really can't stress this enough. So having somebody who's a mentor for you, they can help you, guide you through all these situations that are going to be unfamiliar to you now. You've probably never had to get in there and have a talk with somebody about why they're not really doing as well as they should be. And so having somebody who's been there before, that's really totally invaluable. And this should be somebody that you admire for their leadership. Previously maybe you've had a mentor before. Maybe when you were an engineer, it was somebody who was a really senior engineer in your company or that you worked with previously. And unless they've also kind of made this jump and been doing it and have experience now, that's probably not the right person. You want to find somebody who is doing this same job and who is excelling at it. If at all possible, the best case scenario, I think, is to have the lead that you're emulating as your mentor, because they're going to be able to give you those insights of why, how all those pieces interact together, and then you'll have that understanding, and maybe you'd be less tempted to tweak it, or even just understand that by changing this one thing, what other effects that might have. It's also important to have realistic expectations for yourself in this new role. So here's the bad news. You are probably not going to be great at first. I certainly know that I wasn't. You're going to make mistakes. That is probably another kind of obvious thing. This is the first time that you're doing this job. To expect perfection from yourself is very unrealistic, and I don't think anybody else is going to expect you to be perfect either. They will expect you to learn from those mistakes and try not to make them again, but it's okay to make mistakes. Just make sure you learn from them. Like I said, you're going to get stressed out. Be ready for it. Whatever kind of support system you need to have for yourself, friends, significant others, people at your company, whatever it is, some people to vent to and talk to, and make sure that you can kind of get through it when the going gets tough. You're also going to get overwhelmed, the same kind of thing. Sometimes it's going to feel like the world's crashing down around you, and you'll get through it. And as you keep working at it, you're going to get better. As long as you are focusing your time and effort into becoming a better lead, you are going to get there. So another thing that's really important is to set a good example. And what I mean by that is you kind of set the tone and help establish a culture for your team. And if you don't do that, if you're not intentionally creating that culture, it's going to just sort of happen anyways. So you might as well control it and try to have it be a positive thing that you set up intentionally. So this is going to kind of establish stuff like what's acceptable behavior. Is it all right to go off on a profanity-laced rant during team chat or meetings? Like if you do all these things, that is going to signal that that's something that's okay to do. This is not one of those kind of do as I say, not as I do things. We're all adults here, and so the way that you act is going to influence the way that your team acts. It's also going to set the tone for your interaction with other teams. I know in places I've worked at in the past, sometimes it's been easy to kind of have this, the programmers are awesome and we're right and everybody else is wrong and they don't know what they're doing, and maybe even sometimes that's true, but it's not a really healthy attitude to have, because you still have to work with all these people, and so you want to make sure that you have a good working relationship with all the other teams. None of us can kind of do this do a whole game on our own, or at least most of us can't. So that's really important to make sure that you can work well with others. And then another thing here is your attitude towards a project. There are going to be times that you might get kind of bummed out about the way things are going. Maybe the publisher has asked you to do something you think is stupid or whatever, right? Like things just aren't going well, you're not happy about it, and it's important that you don't project that to the team. They're going to pick up about that, and they're going to get really bummed out too. So I know that's sort of asking a burden for you to carry there, but it's really important that you kind of have a positive, like public-facing attitude about the project at all times. And even if you have to go in and you got to ask somebody to do this dumb thing that the publisher has asked for, you can be an adult and be mature about it and explain like, hey, I know that this isn't how we would do it, but they're the ones paying the bills here, so that's kind of how it has to go. And it's important to note that once your team culture is getting established, it's going to be really hard to change it. People kind of get ingrained in those habits, and and that's going to be really difficult to reverse. So again, just really important to get off on the right foot with this. So I know we talked about delegation earlier. It's important enough that I think it deserves to be a tip. So it's going to be really hard to let go at first. Maybe there are things that are what used to be in your expertise or your specialty. Maybe you were a rendering person and you see this rendering task and you can just absolutely crush it, and you want to get in there and you want to do it. It's probably something you enjoy doing, but you've got a lot of other responsibilities now, and so it's important to make sure that your team members are the ones who are kind of handling some of this other burden now. The good news is that as you learn to let go and you hand things off to people and they do well, that success is going to build on itself. When you let a few things go and then everything turns out okay, it feels great, and it's going to help you the next time you're like, hey, there's a lot of stuff here, but I know that I can trust everybody to get it done, and we can all kind of divide the workload and take care of things. And that's not to say that things might be a little rocky initially. Like maybe somebody, you were the rendering person, and now somebody else has stepped into that role. They're learning maybe a new job too. But it's important to just kind of trust the process and continue delegating things out, letting them kind of take their lumps and become the new expert. So it's also important to treat everyone fairly. This probably sounds really obvious, but I think it's also important to note that treating everyone fairly is not the same as treating everybody exactly the same. Junior versus senior developers, you're probably going to treat them differently. A senior developer, you're probably going to have a pretty long leash for them if they, maybe they even kind of self-direct a little bit. They know they see something is going kind of wrong in the project, and they go off and they kind of do that thing, and they'll shoot you a heads up like, hey, this is what I'm doing, and that's okay. But if a junior developer did kind of the same thing, that might be a little worrisome. Their intuition might not be as well. Something they think might be a problem might be a total red herring. So, this kind of gets more into stuff like not giving any kind of special privileges to people or anything like that. Again, it sounds super obvious, but it can kind of happen because at one point, if you got promoted from within, these people who are now reporting to you, they might have been your teammates. You might be friends with all of these people, and so that familiarity can kind of translate into some unintentional favoritism. So just be aware of it, and you'll be fine. A tip that I got from my boss when I first started doing this was every day just focus on what the most important thing is for that project. Or two things or whatever, but figure out what's the most important thing I could do today to help the project, and go do it. Maybe that is going to be diving in and helping a bunch of people sort through problems that they're having. Maybe it's just slogging through like a whole list of code reviews that have kind of gotten backlogged because everybody's been busy. Maybe it's chasing down the publisher or other teams for requirements and other stuff you need from them. Whatever that is, figure it out and go do it. And it's quite possible it might be different every day. Some days, maybe the most important thing that you could do is roll up the sleeves and sling some code around. And this can make things your behavior maybe look a little bit erratic to people who kind of don't understand that this job is going to require you to kind of bounce around and do this kind of thing, and that's okay. Even though it looks a little bit erratic, you're taking care of the stuff that's important, and that is what matters. Another good piece of advice that I got from that same boss was to ask the second question, and what that means is you're in a status meeting and you're kind of going around the room, you're talking to everybody, you're seeing how people are doing, and something just doesn't seem right with something somebody's saying to you, and you're not really sure, but your spidey sense is telling you something is not right. It might be tempting to just kind of leave that one be, think that maybe you're overanalyzing it or whatever, but you should really trust your gut, and not in front of everybody, but afterwards, you should, sit down with that person and kind of dig in. Ask that second question. Ask more about it. Ask until you are satisfied that either everything is actually okay, or that your gut was right, and that something is wrong. They're behind. Things are slipping. They don't have really a good handle on what's going on. And this might be uncomfortable, because you're kind of confronting somebody about something, but it does get easier. And as you have success with this, as you kind of see that your instincts are correct, it'll be a lot easier to kind of do that, because even though it's probably always going to be a little uncomfortable to do, but the results are always going to be a lot better for doing it. So just know that it'll get a little bit easier with time. It's also important to solicit feedback about how you're doing. Especially early on, you're going to probably be making a lot of mistakes, like we talked about earlier. So you want to course correct early. Find out about those mistakes as soon as you can, rather than waiting to hear about them in like a yearly review or whatever. Waiting to course correct on yearly reviews is like the worst thing you could possibly do. It's like, okay, great, I've been making the same mistake for a year, and then a year later I'll find out if I fixed it. So getting some feedback, whether it's from your team or from your superiors or both, that's really helpful, because it's going to help you fix problems a lot earlier. Might not be easy to do, because especially people who are now reporting to you might not be comfortable giving you feedback face-to-face or even in an email, telling you what you're doing wrong. That's, I think, never easy to do, especially for someone who's kind of now your boss. So some stuff you can kind of do there is maybe you can set up some sort of anonymous email system for people to just, whatever kind of comments they have, or you could do some sort of skip level thing and have people email your boss directly and talk about what's going on. But it's important to set that up, and it'll pay dividends down the road. Another one that is kind of like seems obvious here is stay organized, and there's really a lot to keep track of as a lead. So you're probably going to get more email than you got when you were just an engineer, and that could easily become a huge drain on you if you don't figure out how to manage that appropriately. Maybe you shut down Outlook every hour or whatever. You only pop it open at specified times of the day to check email. Filtering, whatever you do, figure out some sort of way to make sure that email doesn't totally dominate your time. You also have, in addition to whatever individual task you're trying to get done for that day, you've also got everyone else's tasks that they're working on, and you need to make sure you're keeping track of that in some way, shape, or form. Tools like Jira can be great for that as long as everyone's using them. Following up in person or over email or IM or whatever, if you just for kind of a quick status check. But it's it's something you got to keep track of, and you can't just ignore it and hope that everybody's getting everything done. That will end very poorly. There's also the schedule. So you probably either maybe you inherited a schedule that somebody else wrote up, or you got to be a part of making it. Either way, if you are not keeping that schedule up to date, I think that's pretty much garbage at that point. Like, you really need to keep that in line. Like, how are things going? Like, are these tasks taking longer? By some miracle, are things taking a shorter amount of time than anticipated? It does happen. So you want to keep that schedule up to date and make sure that you can kind of see how your milestones are tracking. And that's going to give you an opportunity. Maybe it's going to be a close call. Maybe you can ask for help and get some additional engineering effort to kind of knock that out and make sure you still hit that milestone. But if you're not tracking all this, then there's no way that you're going to be able to know that that's happening. It's going to come as a big surprise at the end. And one of the big things that I've had started doing for the past few years, even honestly, even just as an engineer, at the beginning of my day, I make a prioritized list of everything that I want to get done. And the priority part is important. We've only got so much time every day, and there's probably more than you want to get done in a day than you have time for. So make sure that list is prioritized so you take care of everything that's most important first, and that anything that falls off the list was maybe not that important in the first place or can get handled the next day. And what can help to get this list made is come in a little bit early, maybe before the rest of the team gets in, come in whatever, half an hour early. It's a little quiet time before, everybody starts clamoring for your time. That's been super helpful for me when I can manage. All right, so the last thing we're going to talk about some mistakes to avoid. I think I've probably made all of these, so I can definitely speak to how bad they are. So one mistake you might make is trying to tackle all the hardest problems. And it's going to be tempting because you were probably a pretty skilled engineer before you became a lead. And so you see a problem come across and maybe it just triggers that like engineer brain thing. You're like, oh, that's a good problem. I want to get in there. I want to solve that. I want to be the hero or whatever. Or even just, you've been doing kind of all this leadership stuff and maybe you miss kind of doing more of the coding stuff, and so you're just itching to get hands-on keyboard time. And also, it can be kind of hard to trust people at first. You're getting used to having to let people handle all these things, and if you were really good at your job before as an engineer, you have to trust that other people are going to be able to handle it too. And also, like, your job is to help them become that good. So, yeah, it can be, if you spend too much time trying to tackle all these like engineering problems that might come across the board, fixing these bugs, and oh, this system looks really cool to implement, that's taking away from time that you're steering the team and helping develop everybody. So just something to look out for. Also be aware of becoming a single point of failure. So I know what you're all thinking. We're all good engineers here, and we would never, ever, ever set up a system in which case, especially, we are now the single point of failure. But it's a lot easier to get into this than you think. So sometimes this happens because it feels good to be, whatever, the guy. You're the guy who sends the build, or knows how to make the build, does whatever special thing, needs to get done. You're the only person who knows it, and that kind of makes you feel special. But I'm here to tell you that it's a trap. If you are now this single point of failure, you are now the bus factor of one, you are kind of trapped in always being the person who has to do that. If you want to take vacation, well, sorry, somebody's got to get that thing done. Are you sick? Then you're either dragging yourself into the office while you're sick, or you're trying to remote in from home or whatever, instead of just letting that stuff be done. So set up redundant systems. Make sure that you are not the only person who knows how to do something on a project. Get more than one backup if you can. I think you'll be a lot happier for it. And some things you might even find out, you know what, like, I don't have to be the person who does this at all. Like, the backup is doing such a great job that I can just permanently offload this, and that's now one less thing that's on your plate and lets you focus on some other things that might be more important. Also be aware of letting personnel problems fester. So these are never going to be easy conversations to have when somebody is struggling or not doing well, or just straight up did not do the thing that you asked them to do. It's difficult to get in there and talk to them and bring this uncomfortable subject up. But, if you don't do it, things are only going to get worse. And sometimes there's going to be a kind of a temptation to maybe just hope that it works itself out, like, oh, if they're going to get it, they're going to pull out of this nosedive. At some point, you sort of have to rip off the Band-Aid and get in there and talk about it. Because the waiting will make it worse, and yeah, maybe it's going to be a crappy whole rest of your day because you had to go do this, really not fun thing, but you're going to feel a lot better the next day when it is done. And honestly, people are probably pretty aware of when they're struggling. Like, most people know when things are going poorly, so it's probably going to be a lot better for them too. So, do everybody a favor, rip the Band-Aid off, and just take care of it. Be aware of ignoring your management duties. So this could become tempting if you find yourself behind schedule and you're trying to pitch in extra to do coding tasks or whatever to try and help get people caught up. You're thinking like, all right, I can roll up the sleeves here and I can help get us back on track. But it's been my experience that almost every time that I've done this, it's always come at a cost. In the past, when I've decided it's like, okay, I'm just going to kind of have to go heads down and focus on solving some engineering problems today. It's like at the end of the day, I feel great. I knocked out the problem, awesome. I come in the next day, and all of that stuff that I have been kind of pushing off, pushing away, all that stuff comes crashing down on you, and it's much worse than if you would have just taken a little bit of time at least out of your day to be checking in on everything. So, don't totally ignore all of your duties. It sounds obvious, but it happens. Also be aware of falling into the trap of just doing it yourself. So maybe a task or a bug comes in and you look at that and you're like, I could just knock that out. Even though it's not something that you should probably be concerning yourself with, you think like, I know what it is or whatever. So when you do that, you are robbing somebody of that potential experience, learning how to do that. And especially if this is something that maybe is going to come up often. Maybe you've got a system that tends to have like lots of little bugs like this, and they're all kind of related. That can end up being only a short-term gain, and you're sacrificing kind of a longer-term, better solution by getting that person trained up. Maybe something you could knock out in an hour, maybe it takes them a day initially, but they're eventually going to get spun up, and they're going to be able to do that, and then you don't have to worry about it, and you've got that person who's trained up to be able to do that now in the future. And then the last one here is don't be afraid to ask for help. Not asking for help is totally a mistake. It's okay to ask. I think anybody who is being reasonable, in their expectations of how you're going to do as a lead is going to know that you're going to need help sometimes. This is your first time doing it. Even if it's your fifth time, sixth time, whatever time doing it, like there are probably going to be some times that you just don't know what to do or you need some advice or whatever. And so ask. People are there and they want to help you. And if that's not how your company operates, you should probably be polishing up your resume and looking elsewhere. And it's important to ask before it's too late. Sort of the number one rule of Iron Galaxy is that the only real bad thing you could do is to not say that things are going poorly until it's too late for somebody to help you fix it. Waiting until the day before a milestone to say, by the way, these 3 features aren't going to make it, that's unacceptable. But saying, hey, 3 to whatever weeks ahead of time, like these things are behind, I need more people, I need, whatever, I need you to help talk to the publisher to make them understand like why these things are behind and, that they might not get everything. That's all right. And so that's it. Thank you guys very much for listening. And if you have any questions or comments, I don't think Keith managed to make it here unless he's lurking and waiting. I know normally he would kind of moderate that, but there's also the little questions widget on the webinar thing. And there's all of my contact info if you ever want to get in touch with me. Feel free to email, tweet, whatever.
Yeah, we'll give it a couple of minutes to let folks type in any questions if they want to. It does not look like Keith made it in. While we're waiting, I'll go ahead and plug next week's webinar. Tom Viscaglia will be doing a webinar on the art of negotiation next week. You can find the information about that on the website at IGDA.org/webinars. And we have a question.
I'm trying to get the thing to expand and scroll so I can read the whole thing.
I'll read it for you if you'd like.
That would be great. Thank you.
So we have a question. Have you lost friends, in quotes, when you became their boss?
I've been fortunate enough for that to not be the case, and I definitely have had, people who are close friends, people I've worked with almost my entire time in the industry have ended up reporting to me at some point. So I've been fortunate in that respect.
Thank you. Chris says that this is a great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Question 2. Do you regret those days where you had to do the grunt work of coding?
I like when I personally jumped in and did it. I've I've always tried. Like a bit of advice that I'd gotten once too was to like never skip. I think I forgot to make that a slide, but I got the advice like to never kind of put yourself on like a critical path system just because you might not be able to focus enough time on it and you're going to get pulled off in other directions. And so I've always tried to avoid that, and this is still something that I'm working on because I've still ended up doing a fair amount of coding on all 3 of the projects that I've led so far. So I don't regret doing some. I think it's still good to kind of keep those skills sharp. You are, after all, going to be helping to analyze how people are doing with those things. But I guess I do regret doing as much as I did. I hope that's a complete enough answer.
Yeah, that's good. We can feel free to elaborate on your question if you're not getting exactly what you're looking for. Another question is, how often do you have to resort to comments like layoff if some colleague does not cooperate?
It doesn't happen super often. I bet probably maybe once or twice per project has been kind of what's happened for me, and maybe I've just been, plugging Iron Galaxy. I think I've had great teams, and I think that's because we've built like an awesome tech team there. So maybe I've just been lucky that it hasn't happened, but it's never fun, especially if it's someone you know for a while. It's not really fun to kind of have to have that kind of talk.
Wonderful. We have another comment. All of my best bosses have been ex-programmers. I think it was because they had the logical planning part, but also the patience to explain project limitations to non-techies like me, designer here.
Yeah, I could definitely see that that being the case. There's certainly like a big part of programming. It's not like the syntax or like knowing C++ or C# or whatever your language is. Like it's like applied problem solving, and so leadership, project management, that stuff is all it's like just a different type of problem that you're trying to solve. So maybe that is why that kind of works out that way.
Cool. Well, I think that's it, unless somebody sneaks something in before I wrap this up. Thank you, Mike, for the webinar. This was pretty awesome. Oh, one more question. Thank you for letting me know that there was one more coming before. Okay. Any tips for someone who does not have a lead model to draw inspiration from? I would use Captain Picard, but it's not really relevant.
So like you don't have a good lead to emulate. That's a tough one. I'm super fortunate that I've kind of come up under a few different really good leads. So I'm trying to think of what I would have done otherwise. If you do have kind of you could always use like the counter example, right? Like if you have had leads but they weren't so great, like look at the stuff that made them that made you not happy about like how they did things, right? Like maybe whatever, maybe they were condescending, maybe they just didn't pay enough attention to people, maybe they paid too much attention. Look at all those things and think about it, you know, as kind of somebody who reported to them what you didn't like, and figure out how you would fix that.
Okay, we had one other question that came in. I tried to get a little bit of clarity, but we'll go with what we've got so far. Any tools that can help you, any tools / software that can help you? And I wasn't sure if, okay, so for both helping to lead your team, keeping things on track, time management, just any software tools you recommend.
I do like Jira. I've gotten at least pretty used to it at this point. I've used FogBugs a little bit. Those are both project management tools. FogBugs is amazing, but it is also pretty pricey. I think Jira is a little more reasonable. There's also, I haven't used any of them, but I know there's a lot of like either free or very cheap, affordable project software out there. So kind of look into what your needs are. But like I said before, I think the most important thing is like whatever you pick, you're going to get out of it what you and the team put into it. I've certainly, I've worked on a lot of external projects and stuff too, and some people using the exact same tools have like, totally different results. Some people do a great job of getting everybody to work in the project management tools, and so like even if it was, some sort of freeware thing, like they get great results, and like you could take an awesome tool like FogBugs that, is going to cost you a lot of money and it's had a ton of work poured into it, and if you don't use it right, like you're not really going to get anything out of it. So I think that's the most important thing is whatever you decide to use, make sure you really try and use it.
Are you saying FogBugs as in like FOGBUG?
FOGBUGZ is how they spell it.
BUGZ. Okay. I'd not heard of that one before. Chris Crowell also pipes in that he has used Trello, which is a free online tool, as a digital agile board with tasks noted on cards on lists. And I know.
Yes, Trello. Sorry. I was just going to say Trello is also awesome and actually made by the same people who make FogBugs. So probably not a coincidence that those are both like top-notch pieces of software.
I muted myself and started talking instead of unmuting myself. I think that we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Mike's contact info is there on the screen. We can follow up with him online if there's anything else that comes to mind, either 10 minutes later or tomorrow. And I will be working to get the recording up online, hopefully within the week. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.